Good design doesn't necessarily have to be expensive. So in today's video, I'm going to be redesigning a subscriber's tiny box room office by making some pretty dramatic but affordable changes. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I used SketchUp and Photoshop to reconfigure it into the ultimate minimalist productivity workspace. Firstly, I have to thank Marc for sending this in. This is his current office, which is the box room of his semi-detached home which he bought 5 years ago before quitting his job to start his own business. And understandably, in this time, he never really got around to making this space his own. Initially, my observations are that there's a lot of stuff in here, but to cut Marc some slack, he sent me this almost immediately after I announced this series. So by making it in as the first ever submission, I had to admire his speed and transparency in really showing his space in its natural habitat. Apart from the clutter and colour scheme, this setup already looks like it has some pretty nice peripherals, with a nice black desk mat and a Logitech MX Master Mouse. And judging from the additional photo that Marc sent of his living room, it does look like he already has some pretty good taste, with an appreciation for Hague blue interiors. The first thing that struck me about this space is how easily office stuff just makes its way onto every shelf, ledge and surface available, and I think that we're probably all guilty of this, including myself. So as the very first point of call is a good declutter, we have to establish what's being used regularly and what isn't, and my guess is that half of the stuff inside this room doesn't actually need to be here. To get this concept design started, I first needed to input all of the measurements from Marc's sketch into SketchUp and start extruding out the walls and adding in any features from the photos. In the UK, a lot of houses have box rooms like these above the home's entryway, and in cases like this, it looks like the headroom required for the stairs below it is eating into the room's floor space using this boxed out section. Based on the dimensions, it was pretty easy for me to estimate that this room had an 838 door, and the approximate window size and position could be guessed using commonly used heights and sizes. As this is only a concept, I then had to approximate the other elements in the room like the cabinets, timber paneling and desk, and detail in some of the features we'll be showing later, like the windows, blinds and handles, as well as finding little models for the majority of Marc's setup, which altogether give me a helpful idea of what the room currently feels like within the model space. And seeing as it already felt quite crowded without even modelling all of the other items in the room, I knew that this was going to be a bit of a challenge. My initial inclination is that all of the non-referential books can make their way down to a dedicated section in the living room, and old unused equipment can either be retired or upgraded. Simply by doing this and utilising the wall space above the doorway could completely free up the wall behind the desk and help bring some much needed calm to your peripheral vision, which immediately makes the room feel much more spacious by removing all of the bulky things at eye level. With the desk, my first inclination is to remove the task lamps completely in favour of a more compact solution, which we'll get to later. Then with the walls clear, we can start thinking about using them to move things up and off the desk like the business phone and the monitors. I'm personally not really a fan of multiple monitor setups, especially when they're mismatched, but if you really need the screen real estate and don't have the budget for a widescreen monitor, they do make affordable and effective solutions. You can easily mount all three of these to the wall and off the desk with adjustable monitor brackets, and you can avoid running multiple cables to each monitor by mounting a single extension cable and HDMI splitter on the wall behind them, so each monitor can receive power and signal through these two visible cables, which massively reduces the amount of visible cable clutter involved in this kind of setup. This immediately makes the space feel infinitely cleaner than it was before, which allowed me to start thinking about what I could add to the space in order to make it work a lot harder than it was before. As clutter is often inevitable when working at a desk, I opted to put in an IKEA pegboard as a place that can evolve with the needs of the room, which I've found to work really well for keeping things like letters, pens and electronics off the desk. And then I figured that all of the handles could be affordably updated with something a little more clean and contemporary, and the moulded pine door could be replaced with a flush one in its place. Then I thought I'd choose to paint the room white, as I personally find that I work much better in a room with a lot of natural light, and a light paint does so much in helping light bounce around the room when compared to a darker one. At this point, things were looking pretty good, so it was time for a test render using SketchUp's V-Ray plugin, and I was genuinely really happy with how it turned out. After looking at this image for a bit and giving my work a little bit of criticism, I noticed that painting a built-in desk white might not be the smartest idea in the world, as white is not known to be the most forgiving colour for tea and coffee stains, so I figured going for a grey colour would do a much better job at hiding blemishes, whilst also adding some much needed contrast to the rest of the white room. Then, with that added, I thought I'd tackle the lighting that I promised as a replacement to the 2 task lights that formerly sat on the desk, by installing a white painted timber batten under the cupboards above and sticking an LED light strip behind it. I also figured that we could add this behind the monitors and below the desk to add a really nice glow to the room, whilst also reducing eye strain by bouncing the light off the wall behind the monitors and onto the desk below. And then finally, to add just a little bit of personality, I thought I'd put in an IKEA picture ledge to allow for any sentimental or decorative items so that the room isn't completely devoid of personality. And because picture ledges are a lot shallower than a typical shelf, they don't tend to attract clutter as much or add to the feeling of claustrophobia within the room. The old leather desk chair was also probably the most offensive thing in the room for me aside from the old colour scheme, and because I'm a really big fan of this IKEA one that I personally use myself, I decided to put it in the room as it's really supportive and incredibly affordable without being overly bulky, complicated and commercial looking, which in my opinion makes it perfect for small home office spaces like these. And with those changes made, I was ready to push out the final render and take the image into Photoshop to really bring the whole setup together. Straight out of V-Ray, I think the software does an incredible job of already making the image look pretty great, but to get things looking polished, I brought it into Photoshop and took a second render at a different exposure, as well as maps of the material and render IDs for easy masking in case I need to make adjustments to any of the materials in the model. Just like any photo, a render could always do with some editing from its raw state, so I masked out everything outside of the model and grabbed a generic sky and PNG tree to try to match some of what I could see out of the current window. Then, because the lighting looked a little bit flat, I used the brighter exposure to add a little bit of direction to the light coming through the window and added some glass with realistic warped reflections, as really large pieces of glass are rarely ever 100% straight. This immediately made the image look a lot better, so I went about adding a wallpaper to the triple monitor setup. Seeing as nice wallpapers are quite hard to find for triple monitor setups, I thought that I'd create my own by photoshopping a nice curvy abstract one, which seems to kind of be on trend recently, and in the end I chose to make it blue, which gave me a way to tie the home's colour scheme into the office without making it feel overly dark and claustrophobic. I then finally added a couple of Desenio prints to fill the empty frames on the picture ledge, and the image was done. All things considered, I am really happy with how this turned out, and I think it's pretty crazy what you can do on a really minimal budget to freshen up a space. Seeing as I already had the model, I went about doing a simple photo match to really show how the space has changed from the original, and after applying the same techniques as the first image, I think this also does a great job of showcasing the before and after of the design. This is just a concept, but it was incredibly fun to explore what can be done with small spaces like this one. If you enjoyed this video, I'd quickly like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, who allow me to continue making videos like this one. Over on Nebula, I've made the full unedited screen recordings from this video completely available, so you can get a much deeper and closer look into my process. Over there, myself and a bunch of other creators post ad and algorithm-free content that's on a platform completely separate from the YouTube algorithm, so we can post stuff without worrying about analytics and statistics, and as a viewer you get all of our usual content plus bonus content with no ads, with the Nebula version of this video having this section removed entirely. Today I'm excited to let you know that you can get Nebula completely free with a subscription to CuriosityStream, which is its own separate documentary streaming platform that has thousands of insightful films and shows, and to to quickly give you an idea of what you can expect on there, I recently learned that the walkie-talkie skyscraper in London provides a whopping 40% more floor space than a typical skyscraper of the same height and footprint, which kind of helped me somewhat forgive it for its rather polarizing shape. For a limited time, you can get 26% off this Nebula and Curiosity Stream bundle using my link down in the description below. And don't forget that if you have your own space that you'd like me to take a look at, make sure to send it my way using the instructions down in the video description below too. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.